Hello and welcome to the fourth section, Interactivity and Fun with Scatterplot. In this section we will code a scatterplot and learn even more about multiple transitions and animations. Let's find out where and why you should be updating the axis using a variety of events and creating a clip path. In this section I can guarantee you that you will learn a ton of new things. Let's start with updating and scaling. The graph type that we are going to explore is the scatterplot, and in the resources section I've provided the files that you are going to need for this section. Please download them and open the text editor. I have to show you a few things here. First of all, in the index.html file the only thing that I've changed is the title, and it was section 3, now it's section 4. Nothing else. We still have the update button. Let's go to style.css, and here there is no change at all. We have the bar chart and the button. Simple as that. So let's go to app.js, and here I have to admit that we have quite a few changes. First of all, I have an array with data, and this array includes some other arrays. I have 6 positions here and various different of numbers. You can have your own numbers and that's totally okay. The next thing that I'm doing is creating the SVG element, and more specifically creating the variables that I'm going to be using for the SVG element. This part right here should be familiar for you, as it is the same that you've been using from the start of this course. I have a bar chart width, height, and some paddings. For the SVG, I have D3.select the bar chart that we created in the HTML, and then I append the SVG, and I have the 2 attributes, one for width and one for height. Nothing weird here. Let's continue by creating the scales. Again, I will have 2 scales, one for the X and one for Y, or one for the width and one for the height. Let's start with the scale X. This is going to be d3.scaleLinear, and scaleLinear is a method that we learned in the previous section. I will change the domain, and the domain is taking the minimum and the maximum value. The minimum value is going to be 0, and as for the maximum, I'm going to have d3.max, and then data, and the other parameter will be function, which will be an anonymous function that returns the first position, and that's why I have D0. As for the range, I have a bar chart padding and bar chart width minus bar chart padding, and then I'm also going to have it multiplied by 2. As for the height, I'm going to have pretty much the same thing. Again, I'm using the scale linear. For the domain, I have 0, D3 max, data, function, and this time it will return the first position, so that's why I have D1. For the range, I'm going to have pretty much the same thing as before in the width. Alright, let's continue with creating the axis. The first variable that I'm going to use is the axis X, and I have assigned it to d3.axisBottom and scale X. If you're not familiar with axis bottom, then I would suggest you to take a look at my first course about D3 that we've been talking about axis bottom as well as axis left that you are going to see in a bit. And now I'm creating the axis in line 37. I have an SVG with append G, an attribute for class X-axis. Now this class is not in use, but you can go to style CSS and give it your own style. I have also an attribute with transform and translate. Again, all these should be familiar from previous knowledge. Last but not least, I'm going to call the axis X. And now let's do the same in line 47 for the axis Y. I'm going to have a D3, but this time, rather than using the axis bottom, I'm going to use the axis left and scale Y. The ticks here are going to be 5. When you're going to see the final results, maybe the ticks won't be 5, and this is because D3 takes care of it, so you shouldn't be worried about that. On line 48, we are creating the axis Y. I have an SVG append with G and class y-axis. Again, this class is not in use, but you can go to style CSS and give it your own style. I'm going to have an attribute with transform and translate, and last but not least, I'm going to call the axis y, exactly the same as I did in axis x. And so now it's actually time to create the circles, because every scatter plot should have circles. To do so, I'm having an SVG and I will select all the circles. I'm going to chain the data with data, and then of course the ender and append. I'm going to append the circles, and then I will continue with my two attributes, one for CX and one for CY. This will return the scale X with D0 and D1, one for the first position and the other one for the other position. Last but not least, I'm going to have a radius, so that's why I'm using R. The R stands for radius and it will be 10. The color of our circles is going to be gray, so I'm using fill and gray. I'm also going to have some events. If you can remember from our last lesson, we talked about events and how D3 uses them. This is the same part as we did before. So you're going to have D3.selectAll button on click function, and this function closes right in the end. Alright, in this function we are going to have some random data. That's why I'm creating a new array with data which is empty. Now it's time to generate a maximum number for the possible numbers that can be generated. That's why I'm also creating another variable called maximum number, and this will be assigned to math.random, which is a method from JavaScript, and I will have it times 800. So I'm going to have a result from 0 to 800, which is going to be totally random. Now I'm also going to have a for loop. I will have a variable I 0 through 6, which is going to increase by 1 every time. I'm going to generate two coordinates for the circles, one for the x and the other one for the y. I'm going to have both times math.floor, math.random times maximum number. Last but not least, you have to call the push function on the array. So you'll have data.push, coordinate x and coordinate y. Let's also update the scales. You should be having a scale x with domain, and the domain have the minimum and maximum value. So for the minimum, I'm going to have 0, as well as for the maximum, I'm going to have a d3.max data and function d that will return the d0 position. This is the same that we saw a little bit earlier in our code. And exactly the same, I have the same thing for the y-axis. Alright, now all of these things, we should apply them to the graph. So that's why I'm going to have SVG select all the circles, and we will have the data with data. Now I want some animations, so I'm going to add the transition and the duration. For me, the duration is going to be 1500, but it can be whatever you like. I'm going to have the two attributes for the circles, one CX and the other one CY. Again, the functions are going to return accordingly scale X and scale Y. That was it. I think that now we are ready to save and refresh our website. Click on the update button. Everything should work correctly. The coordinates are changing and we are getting different data each time. But there are two problems here. First, if you click enough times, you'll notice that some of the circles appear outside of the axis. The next problem is that the axis is no longer accurate. Some of the circles could have coordinate that isn't accurately represented by the axis. It could be a lower or a greater number. In any case, the axis can't be accurate. Let's go back to the text editor and try to fix that. After the SVG select all circle, I'm going to add another comment about updating our axis, because this is the problem right here, that our axes aren't being updating. I'm going to need the SVG and again the select method. I'm going to select the x-axis, that if you remember, we don't have anything in the style.css, but you can go there and add your own style. And after that, we are going to need the transition because we also want to add some animations. So I'm going to have the transition and then the duration. The duration is going to be the same as before, so 1500 will do the trick for me. And last but not least, you have to call the axis. The first axis is the axis X. And now we need to do the same for the y-axis as well. So I'm going to copy and paste the same part here. Only I will change the y. And now I'm going to save and refresh. Alright, now everything should work fine. Just click on the update and let's see how the axes are being moved accordingly to the duration and the animation that we just defined. And that's how we solved the first problem, but we have one more problem to solve. We will do that in the next video.